Good, Alycia. How are you? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. I'm very well, thank you. And thanks so much for joining me today. I know we've been trying to get a date in the diary to do this for a while. So do you want to start by introducing yourself and tell us a bit about your role at Supermetrics?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Byron Munson. I am the JPAC commercial lead for Supermetrics. I've been in Singapore now for 12 years, which I still find phenomenal. Australian, born Australian. And Supermetrics, we are a marketing analytics platform. So helping businesses basically drive ROI from their marketing, marketing and media investments across the board.
Amazing. And 12 years, wow, you've just beat me. I've been here 11 years. So yeah, long time.
That's so fast. Long time.
I know. Well, thanks so much, Byron. And obviously, you and I, we had a chat a couple of months ago, and we were talking about the major shift in the talent pools and expectations of talent there's been since 2020 and to today. And in particular, in the last year, it's safe to say it hasn't necessarily been the year for many people and potentially what they've envisaged, particularly in tech, and the market has been incredibly competitive. So I really wanted to use this as an opportunity to dig a bit deeper into what it looks like now in terms of the sales approach that is working in the APAC market, and also what changes you've seen. And I think ultimately to give some interview tips and general advice on how candidates can be successful when it comes to looking at new opportunities in sales right now. So Byron, do you want to start by sharing some examples of how Supermetrics has adapted to the changing market and what you look for when it comes to hiring sales professionals to contribute to that growth?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose how we've evolved is we are very much a product-led growth company across the board. Always have been, always will be. But with the evolving market, we're finding basically there's still a lot of room for success and to secure, work with our existing customers, to grow them, or to secure new customers. But what you have to do is, across the market, you have to work a lot harder. So what we've done as a sales org is we've gone from being product first. We now have pivoted very much into putting the customers at the very center of everything we do. So an example would be, back in the day, you would lead with, here's a product demo, does it suit the challenge that you have? And the customer would basically guide the journey and then the selection of the tools. Now what we do is we lead first and foremost with understanding what are the challenges that business faces, then the actual marketers or the media people within those teams, what are they trying to solve, and how does that contribute, or how does their role contribute back to the success of their overall company? So developing deeper rapport so that we can really establish, firstly, is there a fit with the solutions we have? But in order to establish that, we need to understand what is it they're trying to solve for, and helping them build a case internally. So that goes to that fighting harder, being customer centric.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know in APAC, you need to really have strong client relationships, especially when it comes to sales. And you've hired a lot of salespeople throughout your sales career, right? So how has that job market evolved in recent years, and in particular during and post pandemic? Perhaps you can elaborate on some of the differences that job seekers should be aware of today.
Yeah, I think the evolution for me, and I've seen this happen several times when there's a slowdown in the economy, it sort of follows the same path, which is prior to, so in the boom times, I think the focus on recruiting of salespeople is the ability to build rapport. How quickly can we build rapport, have that relationship, and position ourselves as the trusted pair, like the safe pair of hands to solve for a customer's unique problems that they have. As we get into times such as we're seeing now, where no one's quite sure what's happening in the economy, we're having to still build the rapport, but we now need to understand, as an individual sales team or as a member of a sales team, what are the activities? What do I do on a daily basis to be successful? So we go down to the activity levels, the customer meetings booked, what are the next steps? So we dive, and as an interviewer, I dive deeper into the attributes on a day-to-day basis that will make a salesperson successful. Whereas in the past, I'd probably focus on rapport, and we would talk about the attributes, but they wouldn't be as high priority as they are now, because again, we've got to fight harder for deals. So therefore we need to know more about our customers. We need our CRM up to speed so we can really understand market trends by pulling data that's probably the key difference that I see where we are now. Yeah, across the board,
Yeah,
fighting
that's really,
harder.
yeah, no, that's really interesting, especially on the sales metrics part. And I think a lot of companies are looking more closely at that and how effective people are being and really getting into the data, as you say. And if you were to interview a candidate, how would you expect them to convey that their use of sales metrics, and how would you want them to break down their achievements so that they stand out? Because that's obviously quite hard to convey during an interview in some respects.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say, and it surprises me how when I'm interviewing candidates, this doesn't necessarily happen. So when I'm interviewing salespeople, I want them to treat. I believe the best approach. I need to edit that. I believe the best approach is to treat the person you're interviewing with and the company as a prospect, as you do in your sales role. Every touch point through that process demonstrates the way in which you would be talking, conversing, moving through the stages, asking closing questions, every step through that interview process. What I sometimes find is candidates have a more relaxed attitude and they want to know how the business currently sells. But in these times, you actually want people to lean in and demonstrate, this is how I do it, and I'm willing to learn. So the candidates that stand out really own their approach from, yes, activities, activities which leads to getting in front of the right customers, to building rapport, and then walking through the closing process. So they want them to treat me as a prospect to demonstrate that, but then articulate it throughout the course of the interview process.
Yeah.
And I've got to say, with salespeople, it amazes me how little that is actually occurring. But what that does is it makes the people who are doing that stand out in the field instantly.
Yes, absolutely. So what would you say are some of the common interview mistakes that candidates should avoid, and how can they better prepare for interviews?
Common mistakes. That's a great question again. The common mistakes are not leading the narrative within an interview process.
Mm-hmm.
They're not owning their space in the room, looking to sort of be told how, as I mentioned before, how does a company actually sell, rather than coming and going, this is how I do it, this is how I run deals, and demonstrating that the whole way through. So the mistake is lack of ownership of the interview process. The interview is a pure reflection of how you're going to be out in the field and what you're going to be like to manage. And I think in the context of today's market, I would say 8 to 12 months ago, the market was really thin with talent. Whereas now, that is because the tech companies had been taking on so many people during the pandemic. They've been growing their workforce because digital transformation is happening at such a great speed, because we're all sitting at home on the internet. It makes perfect sense. It had to. All these tech companies needed to fill these roles. But what's happened now is with these ongoing layoffs, etc., there's a lot more talent in market. So you really need to find your way of diversifying yourself, and that's through owning your own narrative and story and being confident. And the other piece I'd say is, in particular with companies similar to Supermetrics, is we offer a free trial. The amount of candidates that come and we start talking about our product and they haven't jumped in and trialed the product, I think that's something where you're doing yourself a disservice, because it proves, well, to me, what it says is that you haven't done enough research to understand, how does the company go to market, how do they sell, and have questions around the product. Like there's look at every opportunity and break it down and research the business you're talking to, and that's how you become the more standout candidates in the pool.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think, you know, when we prep candidates to interview, we will always say, make sure you research the company and dig a bit deeper into their product. Not everybody does that. And I think there has been a sense in the past that people can just wing it and hope for the best, and it will just be a casual chat. But in order to stand out now in this market, you do have to go the extra mile, and you do need to show that you're interested. But more importantly, if you don't know the product and you don't have an interest in the product because you've not done the research around it, you could be walking into an interview not knowing whether this is the right product you want to sell. How can you be passionate about selling a product that you know nothing about? And I think that will come across in an interview, and you won't show your interest as much. So I think that is underestimated. And I think that for me as well is a common mistake. I don't think enough research is done prior to interview. You'd never go to a customer meeting and just wing it and just say, oh, I hope for the best. I don't really know anything about this company, right? And it's the same goes for interviewing. And onto that, how important is cultural fit when it comes to hiring salespeople? We talk about cultural fit a lot, but how important actually is that? And how could maybe candidates assess and convey their alignment with a company's culture?
Yeah, I think so what I'd say is, again, that comes down to research.
Mm-hmm.
So most companies, both the companies you really want to work for, they will publish their company values. But what I'd say is, again, in a market where you've got to try harder, you've got to demonstrate your skills to a deeper level, it's actually reviewing all of the content. So there's one thing to say, here are the 5 words that represent the company culture or the values. But what I'd say is go a step further and seek out videos where the CEO is talking about their particular approach to business. How does the global sales rep, how in my position as the commercial lead, if I've been out, what is Byron doing on social media, and talk about and form an opinion about the company culture based on what we're actually out in market talking about.
Yeah.
It's all too easy, and I've had this on a couple of occasions where AI, which is incredible, that where candidates will go and type in values of Supermetrics
Mm-hmm.
into ChatGPT. Now, that in itself is a great initiative. It's great, but it is not a unique initiative, because the amount of times we've reviewed CVs that people just copy and paste what's in ChatGPT and put it as part of their cover note. It says the same stuff. There's different words. So what I'd say is, make sure that you're informed enough by having many different avenues. Use ChatGPT, but then use your own skills and experience to go, this is what I understand of the culture, and here are the elements of myself that fit with the culture.
Yeah.
Or the other aspect is, call out where there are gaps, but why those gaps could be advantageous. Because I move the needle fast. So yes, we have a culture of learning. We've got a culture of learning. Yes, I love to learn. Tell me how. The example is, I moved revenue across my team in a former role by 30%. I did that through these 3 or 4 initiatives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The AI piece is really, really interesting, because I think everyone is so new to it, right? And I think everybody needs to be upskilling themselves, especially next year, on how to use it properly, because I think it can be super effective if you know how to use it. But again, you don't want to use it for the wrong reasons, and then it becomes a super generic tool and everyone's answers are the same. So how do you think, I mean, are your team upskilling themselves in AI? How are you going to keep your team ahead of the game when it comes to AI?
Yeah, so what we do is, we actually have integrated, so Supermetrics has an AI tool that we use, and that is in many elements. So when we go to market, we'll identify certain customers that we want to be talking to. So yes, we'll use the AI tool to understand, similar approach to an interview, understand the high level, what the customer is, what they do is at a business level. We may get the tool to summarize the annual report. It's just a time-saving functionality. Then we'll have individual people within that company we want to reach out to. Again, AI tool first to help us point us in the right direction of where we should go and do more research. It is not the only tool. It is not a shortcut to being informed. It's one of the tools you have in your toolkit. So that's how we use that as a team, to get closer to our customers and be pointed in the right direction of where we can go and do additional research, to really surface genuine questions that our competitors may not have done. A lot of, and this goes back to being a candidate, you've got to look at your competitive set and understand, what are the skills I really bring to the table, and own those. And AI as part of so I often ask, how do you prepare for an interview? Oh, I use AI, or use this, that, and the other. I want to hear about more and more, rather than just AI, because everyone uses AI. And they're getting the same sort of answers. Yeah.
It's going to be interesting for next year for sure. And if anyone knows of any good AI, webinars, then I am all ears, because I think we should all be looking at how we can use it effectively. And in terms of networking, it's obviously back in Singapore, and that's brilliant, because for me, Singapore has always been a very face-to-face market. Meeting people face-to-face is really important, especially when it comes to building relationships. So are there any networking or relationship building tips that can help candidates connect with potential employers or even mentors in the SaaS space, or just the sales roles in general?
Yeah. So a couple in our space with marketing and media, there's a couple of sort of go-to. One is the IAB. So that is something that is very easy to join, to become a member of. So I encourage everyone to become a member of that. Also, then if you have teams that have marketing functions, I would have the marketing functions also go out and join the marketing society and bring back information to the team around what's happening in the industry. I think the networking side is incredibly important. So it's really how you build rapport with agencies. What are the media agency events that are happening in market? Finding your niche. So for us as data, there are groups in every country that exist to promote and support that particular part of the marketing or media industry. Just find those and experiment.
Yeah.
There are some you resonate with, others that you won't. So I think that's important. I think the other, talking about the pandemic, is we have employed people in the past, and I also hear peers of mine talk about a lot of people are in sales roles now, or in SDR roles. They actually came out of university into the pandemic and got their first role with not having that customer facing experience. So I think I would encourage people to get out of their comfort zone and get back into doing face-to-face, because it's really important. If we're thinking about just individual differentiators when we're doing our day-to-day jobs, taking someone out for a coffee or going to their offices is so much more powerful than having what we're doing on the screen, having these conversations.
Yeah.
Because the rapport you build, the network you start building, so on and so forth, it's really valuable. But I appreciate there's a lot of people who or a generation where this hasn't been a requirement of their job. So again, how do you step outside and differentiate yourself from the peers?
So going back to the pandemic, when we had graduates who had never worked in sales before, they were having to learn on their own at home. And that's a very different environment to how I learned sales and how you learned sales. We were probably in big offices or surrounded by lots of different peers who we could listen to and learn from on a daily basis. It was really hard for new salespeople to come into this market and learn from people around them, because really, unless you were on webinars all day, or had somebody on Zoom all day, which nobody did, I hope, then it was really difficult to learn quickly. So I think the expectations of candidates this year in comparison to the previous years have increased because of that need for face-to-face interaction with clients, and therefore it has been harder for them this year potentially. And that's why we need to continue to upskill salespeople. We need to continue to involve them in meetings, in the office, on calls, really get them learning and build up their confidence to be successful in this market.
Yeah, agreed. 100% agreed. And I think I think one of the key areas is to take initiative. If you're seeing gaps, you don't have to. No one's perfect. I'm not perfect. Our business isn't perfect. The candidate's not perfect. So I think sometimes we miss things. So if there are gaps, I would say ask about those gaps. And I would encourage everyone to do peer-to-peer learning and use initiative, as I said, to do peer-to-peer learning, or go to your direct manager or your boss's boss and go, even if you don't know how to articulate it, just go, here's a theme. I'm not sure how to articulate this, but there's a gap, and this is the theme I'm seeing when I'm out in the field doing my job. What is, help me articulate that, because then then you can work with your, again, peers or with your manager, etc., to understand, this is the area of enablement we need to cover.
Yeah.
No one ever deliberately doesn't enable their team. Everyone wants their teams to be enabled. There just may be at times, I think, different skill sets from different ways that we first started working, that we just need to come together and close the gaps on.
Yeah, because we can all learn from each other. I mean, that's how we continue to learn, right? And I think, with that missing piece, and everyone still wants to work from home to some extent, which I think is fine, but I think the balance is really important. You've got to have face-to-face time with your colleagues. And lastly, just to finish up on this today, and obviously, Byron, thanks so much for your time, and it's been really interesting to have this conversation with you. Are there any final tips or tricks you'd like to share on how candidates can get ahead of the competition in today's job market?
Yeah, I think taking a really strategic approach to what is your story and owning that story. So that could be, I would say, outline, obviously, look at your experience. One of the questions I ask candidates is, if people come to me and throughout their career they've had 2 or 3 jobs, one of the questions I'll ask is, talk me through the thought process between each of those jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes you'll get candidates who have really strategized, and they'll go, well, I went from an SDR in fintech because it was a really hard time for me to get a job. I just wanted to get into tech, so I got into fintech. I was there. I then went from fintech into Salesforce and Adobe or a startup. Here are the reasons why I made that move. What I learned in this role was X, Y, Z. That means I worked out I really love talking to, in our case, I love talking or selling to marketers. So then I wanted to get into MarTech. So is there a narrative? So I think that's what's strategic. But also call out where there's gaps. We have interviewed some incredible people on our team. They're like, I just don't know. I thought it was going to be a great company to work for. Turns out it wasn't, or I wasn't a fit with the culture. Like, you can own that story. So have the narrative. That narrative should include what it is you do in your day-to-day. So the activities, how you get to that first customer call. Do you do outbound? Do you do inbound, expand or growth, etc.? What is your uniqueness you're bringing to a particular role that you're applying for? Why are you applying for it?
Yeah.
I think the challenge is when people come to interviews and you do get a sense very quickly that they're just applying for every role they possibly can.
Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily send the right message. You know, you've got to be able to show your interest in the role. And if you're not interested, just say no. Like, don't go for the interview, because it's a waste of everyone's time. But also, you know, you want to be following what it is you want your career trajectory to look like. You don't, you know, so don't, I think that's an important thing. Don't be afraid to say no. If a recruiter calls you up and they're briefing you on the role and it's not something that's interesting for you, it's okay to say no. We don't have to say yes to everything, you know, if it's not right.
Yeah, and I think the final piece for me would be, if the interview goes well or it doesn't go as well as what you thought, ask for feedback. Ping the manager. First, connect with everyone you're interviewing with on LinkedIn before the interview.
Yeah.
Right? So again, demonstrate your skills. But after the interview, regardless of how it went, ping them on LinkedIn, or if you've got their email, and say, hey, I can just have a 5-minute call just to get feedback. Because that shows genuine intent. And we've actually, on a couple of occasions, re-engaged with people that for whatever reason didn't have a particularly good interview, but the ability to ask for feedback, and then on that call, it's actually another interview that person the candidates ask for themselves. It all adds up. In that moment, we've put people back into the recruitment process because their approach in asking feedback and then how they actually want to just asked if we could still move forward, so on and so forth. So a no isn't a no. And that demonstrates a person's ability to meet with customers and do deals, because no doesn't have to be a no in sales. It can just be, oh, is there another way to do this?
How good is that?
The initiative side is really important for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Byron. It's been really good chatting with you today.